as it's recorded in Luke. Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up onto a mountain to pray. While Jesus was praying, his face changed in appearance, and the clothes he wore became dazzling white. Suddenly, two people were there talking with Jesus, Moses and Elijah. They appeared in glory and spoke of the prophecy that Jesus was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Peter and the others had already fallen into a deep sleep, but awakening they saw Jesus' glory and the two people who were standing next to him. When the two were leaving, Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, how good it is for us to be here. Let's set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter didn't really know what he was saying. While Peter was speaking, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and the disciples grew fearful as the others entered it. Then, from the cloud, came a voice which said, "This is my own, my chosen one. Listen to him." When the voice finished speaking, they saw no one but Jesus standing there. The disciples kept quiet, telling nothing of what they had seen at that time to anyone. The Gospel of Christ. Please be seated. As I said earlier, Transfiguration Sunday is an odd festival in the church year. We know from New Testament scholars that what I just read is not designed as history. This is a vision. These are metaphors. And so we approach them as visions and metaphors on this day. So I want to keep our focus on visions today. So to transfigure, well, you know how much I love words. So the first thing I do when I have to deal with something like the word transfigure is to go to the Oxford Dictionary, because you can only trust the Oxford Dictionary. And it has to be the one my grandfather gave me that was published in 1956. The year before, never mind. Anyway, according to the Oxford Dictionary, published in 1956, to transfigure means to transform into something more beautiful. To transform into something more beautiful. Well, when I was a little girl, I had an image of God that looked very much like a powerful old man who could take care of things for us if we did our best to convince him to do exactly what we wanted him to do for us. My childhood vision of God looked a little fuzzy, but the powers of this old man who lived somewhere far away, I was convinced were at my disposal. It was kind of nice, you know? And the reason that I knew that God was going to do what I told God to do is because I was keeping my end of the bargain, which was behaving. For instance, I behaved a certain way, and I was convinced that this powerful old man was watching me behave this way. And because I was behaving this way, my mother would never suffer from a broken back. Because I was convinced that by not stepping on the cracks in the sidewalk, the old man in the sky would see me and pay attention and not hurt my mother. And that's how my image of God worked when I was a child. I knew that if you avoided the cracks in the sidewalk, your mother's back would be spared. Step on a crack, break your mother's back, right? And so who was pulling those strings? It was that old man in the sky. As I grew older, my image of God was transfigured, transformed into something a little better. No longer an old man in the sky, but a more mysterious being that was all-powerful, ever-present, and all-knowing. This omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient presence was always available to hear my prayer. And if this omni-being didn't do exactly what I wanted this omni-being to do, that's because the omni-being was omniscient, all-knowing. And so this wise being knew better than I did about what was good for me. So if God refused a prayer, it was because that was good for me. And as I grew even older, there has been another transfiguration. And the image of the omni-God has transfigured into something far more beautiful. The mystery that is the source of all existence, the mystery that lies at the very heart of reality, the mystery in which I live and move and have my being, is so much more than my feeble images of a person. The mystery is a power that Jesus describes as love. With his life, he describes this power as love. And while I sometimes miss that omni-person, that faraway, elsewhere God who listened to my every need, the mystery that is love is so much more compelling. My image of the divine has been transfigured into something so much more beautiful that I don't even have words to describe this mystery. The power of the love that allures us, that tempts us toward visions of what might be if we allowed ourselves to be transfigured into something more beautiful. This power, this mystery, this is the transformation of my image of God. This love that allures us suggests that we unleash the powers of our imaginations and imagine whole new ways of being. So over the years, I have experienced a series of transfigurations along the way. And these transfigurations have opened me to relating to the one who is beyond the beyond and beyond that also in new ways. And I was thinking about all of these transfigurations. And I was also thinking a little bit about our annual meeting that's coming up, and it occurred to me that the very first sermon that I preached here at Holy Cross 20 years ago happened on a Transfiguration Sunday, 20 years ago, when I preached for call in this place. Now, for those of you who don't know, preaching for call is kind of an audition to be the pastor of a particular congregation. And in that very first sermon, I remember telling a story about the time I climbed the Oberglasser, which is in Switzerland. It's directly across from the Eiger. And it was a lovely story about how I shared communion with a bunch of strangers, a little bread, a little cheese, a little wine. It was a nice story. Anyway, it got me this gig, so. Holy Cross is certainly not the same congregation that I auditioned for all those years ago, 20 years ago. And I'm certainly not the same person that I was 20 years ago. I have a few more gray hairs. I hope that indicates that I'm a little wiser.
Your hair's a lot shorter.
It's a lot shorter. Yeah, I had long hair back then. I was down here. I think I weighed a little more back then. Anyway, we've changed. We've been through more transfigurations than many congregations. Back then, we were a mission congregation. Most of Holy Cross's expenses were covered by grants from the Eastern Synod. Back then, we followed all the suggestions that the church growth experts recommended so that we might grow up into a big congregation. I remember you had lots and lots of dreams that this was just a temporary home and you were going to build a much bigger, much larger, much grander, much churchier building. We had more members back then. After 5 years in this building, we managed to wean ourselves off support from the Eastern Synod. It took some doing, but we entered the fray and spent years working to change the policies of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada. We struggled long and we worked very, very hard, and we took amazing risks. We provided a place for Lionel to complete his internship, and when the time was right, against the rules, we ordained him. And together we celebrated when, after the efforts of so many people, we managed to change the policies of the ELCIC. I remember singing All Are Welcome at the convention after suddenly, for the very first time, I was welcome in the ELCIC. We helped to transfigure the ELCIC into a fully inclusive church. This congregation played a pivotal role in that change. And we began an adult education class that asked some transfiguring questions of our theology. We sold our parsonage, and we invested the money in new programs, and we brought some of the most gifted speakers of our age to this humble little place. And we courageously took on team ministry, and for almost 5 years, Pastor Tom worked with us to transfigure our presence in this community. And we welcomed the homeless, and we were changed forever by them. And we grieved when we began to realize that we had bitten off more than we could chew, and we had to step back and regroup. Some of us dreamt of a wooden ramp to help those who needed assistance to get into this place. But there were bigger dreamers among us, and that ramp was transfigured so that it could transform this building into an accessible place. We have dreamed dreams, and we have taken risks, and we have had more than just a few failures, and some of those failures have been colossal. And so we have been wounded by them. And all along the way, we have been nourished by our traditions, even as we have pushed those traditions with our questions. And we have transformed ourselves into a community that is progressive in approach and Christ-like in action. The power of the love that continues to allure us still tempts us toward visions of what might be if we allowed ourselves to be transfigured into something even more beautiful. As Anne and I were talking yesterday about how to open up conversation at our annual meeting, it occurred to me that we might begin by reflecting upon all the things that we love about this congregation. And I thought, Anne, if you can help me here, what we would do is if we hand these out, and is over here, Paula, if you could hand those out, and then rip off some of these. Look, aren't these the biggest Post-it notes they're just wonderful. If you could rip off a Post-it note for folks, and if you would write in really, really large letters so that everyone can see it, because I'm going to ask you to post it on the wall here. If you could write, I'm going to start the first question so you can be thinking about it while the paper's coming around. If you could write on this piece of paper, what are the things about this community that you value? What are the things about this community that you value?
Is there more to be written on here?
You can, as long as it's legible and people
No,
can
you
see.
have more questions? Or?
There's one more question coming, and you'll get a separate piece of paper for that other question. So take up all the room on the paper, and if you need more paper, I'm sure someone will get it for you. What are the things that you value about this congregation? And when you've finished writing about what you value about this congregation, if you would put it here under the eagle. Post it on the wall under the eagle. So if you post it up under the eagle, and as you're going back, grab another piece of paper, and I'll give you the other question when everyone's ready. And I'm hoping that we have enough. I'm going to go grab some more paper. If we run out of paper, I've got some really big paper. You thought that was a big post-it note. When everyone's done and got a second piece of paper, I'll give you the second question. Okay, so here, ready for the second question? So I said before that this indescribable love in which we live and move and have our being allures us and tempts us to unleash the powers of our imagination. So how about we dream some dreams right at this moment? Let's use the power of our imaginations to imagine a transfiguration of this congregation. In your wildest dreams, what is your hope for this beautiful thing that Holy Cross might be transfigured into? In your wildest dreams, what beautiful thing might Holy Cross be transfigured into? Take a few moments, and when you're done, post them over here. Okay. I love the sound of all of you writing these dreams going onto paper. So we'll ask folks to put things up and then take their seats, and we're going to return to these during our prayers. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to tell you what it is I value most about Holy Cross. I value this community because over and over and over and over again, in the midst of the people of this congregation, I have experienced the sacred, the Holy One, the divine. Here I have found what the mystics call a thin place. A place where there is very little distance between the everyday and the sacred. And here in the midst of you, I have experienced over and over again the love that is the Holy One embodied in you. When we experience God or the sacred, something like a creative transforming power is released in our lives, and we are transformed into something more beautiful. And here in this place, I have experienced this over and over again. I have seen transfigurations, transformations, and I have experienced the sacred. May the love that is God continue to allure us, to transfigure us into something even more beautiful. May the love that allures us work in, with, through, and beyond us, so that together we can be love in the world.